Every team in baseball has question marks heading into the new season, and the Mets are no different. Today, what I want to do is go over the 5 biggest question marks I think the Mets have going into 2025. I hope you stick around today on Mostly Mets. Welcome to Mostly Mets. I'm Jimmy Mack, and like I said, today what I want to get into is my biggest 5 question marks for the Mets heading into the 2025 season. The first one may be a little surprising to a lot of people. There's tons of fans out there and experts and commentators. They're all kind of penciling in Mark Vientos as a real force in this lineup this year. Now, he very well could be. I'm not taking anything away from him. I was very impressed by what I saw out of him last year. He hit 27 home runs in really less than a full season. I think he had like 400 at-bats, 450 at-bats, and he was really good in the postseason. But I think you cannot necessarily say that he's an established star for the Mets. He's not an established star in the big leagues. He's not an established middle-of-the-lineup 40 home run hitter. We just don't know that yet. I hope that he is. I see that he has the potential to be, but the sophomore slump does exist. You know, pitchers now, they have a little bit of a track record on him. They know how they can get him out. They understand that he is a threat now, that he's not just a rookie who you can get to chase and whatever. The mindset of the other team changes when you have a season like he did last year. Now, the lineup is very deep, and you're going to have to pitch to him because there's guys behind him who can hit, and there's going to be guys on base. So I get that he's going to have more opportunity this year, but I just can't sit here and say that I know what Mark Vientos is going to give us. And I think he's really important to this lineup. Can you pencil him in for 40 and 120? No, you can't. Am I saying that he's going to completely fall off the earth and hit 10 home runs and lose his starting job? No. But I think you have to be realistic and say that it is possible that maybe he hits 220 with 25 home runs and 65 RBIs. That's a possibility too. So we can't just pencil him in as a superstar already, because honestly, he doesn't have the track record to prove that. Now, this could all, in a month from now, I could be looking at this and saying this was a really stupid question mark to have. But in all honesty, I don't know what you're going to get. So while I think it's very possible that he does become what we think he is going to, I don't know that for sure. So he has to be, at this point, a question mark. All right, the second question mark is on a guy who, honestly, before last season, we all couldn't stand, and we all wanted him gone and didn't want to see him pitch another game for the Mets, and that's David Peterson. David Peterson had a career year last year. He pitched to an ERA under 3 after his hip correcting. He got the surgery to correct his hip, and he came back and looked like a different pitcher. Now, what I will say with Peterson is his advanced metrics, which I don't really care all that much about. I kind of go by what I see. Maybe I'm a little old school in that way. I don't care as much about the advanced metrics, but his advanced metrics do suggest that maybe he was a little more lucky than good last season. So it's very possible that you see some regression on him. Do I think he's going to be the same kind of guy, who is basically look like a number 2 starting pitcher? I really don't. I think he's still going to be good. I think he's still a middle-of-the-rotation kind of guy, a really good 3 or 4 starter. But do I really think he's going to pitch to a 2.7 or 2.9 ERA ever again? I kind of don't. I think he's probably more in the middle of his career stats. He's a 3.5 ERA kind of guy now. Now, in saying that, he's only 29 years old. He's a former first-round pick. Obviously, he has talent, and there's something there that the Mets saw, and I'm sure other teams saw and would have drafted him as well. And he's still young enough where maybe he is coming into his own. Maybe he finally did figure it out. Maybe his hip was always an issue. I don't know. But you can't say that he's not a question mark, because his track record shows that he only has had 1 good year. And he's had stretches throughout his career where maybe he had 2 or 3 starts that he'd put together, but he was never consistent, and he never had good control. And last year, it was different for him. But you can't go into the season expecting what you got last year. Now, you can expect him to be good, you can expect him to be solid, but I think last year is kind of an aberration if you look at his career. So, another one, again, he could be, maybe he turned the corner, maybe he figured it out. I just don't see it as a definite, and I think that a lot of Mets fans that I'm seeing are saying that he's definitely a number 2 starter. He's definitely, turned the corner and become a really good front end of the rotation guy. That's a question mark because you can't say that yet. You can't say that it's definite yet. So we'll see what happens with him going forward. I still think he's a solid rotation piece. I just don't know that he's as good as we saw last year. All right, the next big question I have for the Mets coming into this season is Pete Alonso. What Pete Alonso are we going to see in 2025? Are we going to see the guy who hit 53 home runs as a rookie, or are we going to see the guy who had a down year last year and hit 34 home runs? Listen, even in a down year, hitting 34 home runs, any player in baseball would take that. And I think he's just a strong enough guy. He's a good enough home run hitter where it doesn't really matter. He's always going to hit 30, 35 home runs. Even in a bad year, it's just going to happen. He's going to run into 35 home runs a year. It's just how it is. But for the Mets offense to be as good as they could possibly be, they need him to be more like the Pete of old. Now, does he have to hit 50 home runs, 53 home runs? No. But he has to be a 40-plus feared home run guy. You need that protection behind Soto because Soto's a guy who walks a lot anyway. And now if you have a guy behind him who you're not scared of, who's swinging at everything, who's swinging at a pitch 3 feet outside of the strike zone, then Soto's going to walk even more. And Soto's not as valuable when he's just on the base paths. He's not a great base runner. He's not fast. He's not going to steal bases. He's not dynamic on the bases. It's great that he's always on base, don't get me wrong, but having protection behind him is very important. Obviously, that's why he had his best year of all time last year, hitting in front of Aaron Judge. I think Pete, at this point, you can't know what he's going to be, right? Last year, it was a contract year. I think he was definitely pressing, and he was trying to prove that he was this great power hitter and that he should get a long-term deal, and I think it affected him all season long. Now, you can also say going into this season, he signed a short-term deal. It's basically a 1-year contract, right? Because he's going to opt out if he has a decent year. So saying that he's definitely going to, be the player he was before, I just don't see that because maybe he's going to be pressing again this year. Now, if you look in spring training, the numbers haven't quite been there, but he does look a little more loose, and his approach looks different than it did last year. He's going the other way. He's using all parts of the field. He's not swinging wildly at pitches, 3 feet out of the zone. So I think the signs are encouraging, even though the stats aren't there. He's really one of the big keys to the year. Between him and Mark Vientos, they're going to be hitting 3 and 5 in the lineup. They need to produce. Soto and Lindor can't do it by themselves. They need their big power guys to really step up and produce. Pete is a huge part of that. And if he's not able to do it, I just don't see the Mets offense going as far as we think they will. And if the Mets offense isn't a top 3 to 5 offense in baseball, it's going to be a tougher year because their pitching probably isn't in the top 10, or 15. It's probably not in the top half of the league, at least to start the season, until we get a little more healthy or until Sproat comes up. So really, we need a big bounce back year out of Pete this year. I'm hoping we see a 40-plus home run. Let's not see him hit 210, 215. Let's see him hit 250, 260 with 40 home runs and 120 RBIs. That's what we need out of Pete this year. We need a bounce back. But we don't know that's what we're going to get, so for me, that's still a question mark. All right, the fourth biggest question mark I see for the Mets this year is Edwin Diaz. Edwin Diaz has had years where he's been dominant, completely dominant, looks like an unhittable closer. We saw that in 2022. Obviously, he missed all of 2023. And then last year, he really had a very up and down season. He didn't start off so great. Then he had the suspension for the sticky stuff. And then he never really got it going. he didn't have his control. There was times where he couldn't locate his fastball and he would only throw the slider. Then there was times where he couldn't locate the slider and he would only throw the fastball. I don't know what you're going to get out of him, but you need a dominant Edwin Diaz to really be a big-time playoff and World Series contender this year. There's nobody else really in that bullpen who could profile as a closer, so Edwin Diaz has to get the job done. He's honestly one of the more important pieces on this team. I think there's only one more important piece than him on the entire roster at this point. But if Edwin Diaz isn't that dominant closer, if he cannot recapture what he was a couple of years ago, or at least come close. Listen, a couple of years ago it was a historic season, and I don't necessarily see him maybe getting to that level ever again, but it has to be close. He has to be more of that guy than what we saw last year. It's possible still. Listen, so far this spring, his velocity has looked down, his control hasn't looked great, but that seems to be a yearly occurrence with him. He's a very slow starter. Much like Lindor, he's a slow starter. He's a little sluggish to start. He might be throwing 96, 97, 95 even to start the season. And as it warms up, as the weather gets warmed up, and as his arm gets, lengthened out a little bit, then he really becomes that flamethrower and that guy who can just throw a wicked slider that doesn't look like anyone could ever hit it. You're always going to see days where he's going to walk the ballpark. It's what happens. It happens with every closer, honestly. There's going to be days where your closer just looks bad. But he also has the ability to look dominant when he's on. So we need more of that dominant Edwin Diaz than we do of that middle of the road or, walk the ballpark Diaz. If we get that, we can go far. If we don't, it's going to be a little bit tough in that bullpen. All right, I think the biggest question mark going forward for this 2025 team is Kodai Senga. The Mets currently, as constructed, don't really have an ace. But the closest thing that they do have to an ace is Kodai Senga. He has the stuff to be an ace. Now, he doesn't have the track record of doing it. He's had one season. Obviously, I know he didn't miss all of last season, but he basically did. He pitched a total, I think, of 7 innings or something like that between the regular season and playoffs. So he missed all of last year. And now he's starting off in spring training or starting off the season where he's going to be pitch limited, at least for the first few starts. They said they're going to cap him at about 75 pitches. They're working him in slow. He's a guy who needs his mechanics working right. He needs everything to click properly. He's just that type of guy. He's very meticulous in his work, and he probably doesn't feel as though he's ready for a full workload yet. Now, my biggest concern at this point is he had a lot of time to get over these injuries. And for him still not to really be able to feel like he can have a full workload, it's concerning to me. I think that, I don't see how we can look at Senga and say this guy is going to be a stud all year. I just don't. Even if he needs a month more to get ready, can I look at him honestly and say he's ever going to be what we saw before or better than that? I don't know. His in the spring, and I get in the spring he's been working on some new pitches and working on some new mechanics or whatever it is, that he hasn't necessarily, getting outs hasn't necessarily been what he's working on most. It's more about just working on his mechanics and working on his new pitches that I think has really taken priority for him. But he hasn't looked very sharp this spring. And he's been bailed out by some good defense. He's walked a few guys. He's given up some really hard hits. Now, listen, it's spring training. He's working on things. That can all change as soon as, his first start of the year. But I just have a big question about Senga. I just don't know that he's going to ever be that guy again. I think he's a guy who deals with a lot of injuries, and he's maybe too meticulous for his own good. I don't mind that the Mets are taking it easy with him because I'd rather have him get 3 or 4 innings a start for his first couple of times through and then have him for the full season, and hopefully he bounces back and becomes what he was. But at this point, you have to think of him as a big question mark. I know we all want to think that he's ready to go and he's going to be our ace and, our pitching staff is better than last year because we have Senga back. Well, I don't know what you're going to get out of him. I hope it's a lot, but I'm not convinced yet. Hopefully he does that over the first couple months and convinces me that he is that guy. But as of right now, I can't count on it. So he has to be a question mark. So just wrapping up here, obviously, those are my 5 biggest question marks for the Mets this year. We have Mark Vientos. Can he avoid that sophomore slump? Is David Peterson a front end of the rotation guy, or is he more like the guy we saw before last season? Which Pete Alonso are we going to get? Can Edwin Diaz be a lockdown closer again? And what will we get out of Kodai Senga in 2025? Those are the biggest keys to me, the biggest questions. If all 5 of those questions get answered positively, I think the Mets will be very successful this season. They'll be one of the top teams. They'll make a run in the playoffs. Until they run into the Dodgers, who knows? You never know what can happen in the playoffs, but they can definitely make a big run if all these questions are answered positively. If a couple of them go bad, a couple of them go well, who knows what will happen. If they all go bad, it's going to be a long season. I don't expect that to happen. Just want to make it clear, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Every season has its challenges. Every team right now is having its questions and challenges going into the season. So the Mets are no different, but these are the problems that I think we have right now. I just want to let everyone know, if you're new here, please subscribe. Give me a comment. What do you think their biggest issue or question mark is this year? And give me a like. If you've been here before, comment. I read the comments. I go through them. I answer back. And yeah, that's really all I got today. And a couple days, we'll be ready for the regular season start. And until next time, let's go Mets.